Hello and welcome to this introduction video to the Boxalino administration. My name is Sylvain Paillard. I'm the CTO of Boxalino, and I will guide you through the two key concepts of the Boxalino admin, the widgets and the narratives. So let's get started. These two key concepts are the backbone of the Boxalino Intelligence Administration interface. So on the one side, we have what we call the widget and page optimizers, or WPO, and their widgets. This is really the different type of things Boxalino can influence on your website, like product recommendation on the home page, search and product listing, recommendations on the basket page, and so on and so forth. And on the other side, we have the narrative and their layout blocks. The narrative defines what type of layout appears on the different pages, and more importantly, how will the widget's content be presented to the user. So what is a widget exactly? Well, a widget is a real-time logic that selects and orders records, for example, products. So each widget belongs to a WPO, which stands for Widget and Page Optimizer. And what type of records is returned by a widget depends on its parent WPO. Here, as we can see, we have all of the different WPO which are listed. The welcome, the search and navi, the upsell, the cross-sell, the rebuy, the individualize, and many more. And each of these blocks is a WPO. So you can see that these blocks, they are organized by rows and by columns. On the first row, the row of the bottom, we have all of the WPOs which are about products. So we will start with these because they are the most typical ones. But all of the other WPOs works exactly the same way. So we have the welcome, which is for the product suggestions on the start page. We have the search and navi, which are for the inside search and product listing. We have the upsell for the similar product recommendations on the product detail page and other recommendations on the product detail page. We have the cross-sell, which is for the add to basket overlay recommendations or recommendation on the basket page, the rebuy, which are for product recommendations on the account page, and the individualize for the product suggestions in the email. All of these WPOs follow the same structure, and they are all containers of widgets. So if I click here on the search and navi, then I will have here a list of widgets, one of them being called category, and each of these widgets, they belong to the WPO search. Now, what is a narrative? A narrative is the layout of a page or of zones of the page with so-called headless content. And headless simply means that we are not providing anything which is related to the view. So we don't provide final HTML and CSS and JavaScript. We're providing content which is final, so it's ready to be displayed, but it doesn't include any of the view elements. So that means you can display it in a website in HTML or an app in a native way. The API remains the same. So the narrative provides you all of the layout information, but not the exact way how to present it to the user. So now let's look a little bit deeper in what a widget really is. So a widget is based on three key concepts: the filters, the rankers, and the scorers. You can think about filters as the way to remove what you don't want. So let's say that you do not want to have any product that have not been sold at least twice in your recommendation, or you don't want to have any products with a price which is equal to 0 in the recommendations. Then you will be able to use filters to completely remove these products out of the way. Then we have rankers. And what rankers do is that they don't remove products, but they make sure that they are either at the end or at the beginning of the list that is shown to the user. So for instance, you might say, well, it's not that I never want to show an out-of-stock product, but if there are several options that are provided by the filters, then I want really to favorize the ones which are in stock significantly. So I would never like to recommend an out-of-stock product when there are other alternatives that are in stock that could be provided according to the defined filters. And finally, we have scorers. And the scorers, they are doing the much more detailed work of ordering the products. So within a certain filters, within a certain ranker group, the scorers will look at all of the products that are passing these two first steps and will create a scoring formula to define which one should appear first, which one should appear second, which one should appear third, according to several conditions that you can define. And each of these scorers will play a role in this scorer formula, and at the end, the product with the highest score will be displayed first. So that's what we see here in the right. So you have all of your content and products. They go through the logic of the widget, so through the filters, the scorers, and the rankers, and they're going out in a specifically selected, specifically ordered way. Now, a big part of the configuration of a widget is to define which logic you would like in the filters, in the rankers, and in the scorers. And for this, Boxalino has created many so-called best practices. And each of these best practices will define what we call a use case as a filter, as a ranker, as a scorer, with the specific parameters that you want. There are 7 categories of best practices. We're not going to get into the detail of them in that video. That's something we will address in a more in-depth video about the widgets, but we'll just go through them to see what they do. So we have the visitor journey personalization. The visitor journey personalization looks at the recent behavior of the visitor. For example, what are the products that the user has recently clicked? And it will use this information as a personalization logic to be able to change the list of results. Then we have the customer journey personalization. The customer journey personalization, they look at the purchase history and other information you have about the customer. So they only work for customers that are logged in, but they're able to capture all of the depth of the purchase history and the information that the customers are giving you. Then we have the marketing alignment, which is able to align with your current campaigns. So you can define your campaigns, and depending on your active campaigns, then the marketing alignments will push different types of products. Then we have the product and content statistics. In our data warehouse, we are generating a lot of different statistics on the products out of the box, so you don't have to create these statistics. You can simply select the properties that you want and use them as filters, rankers, and scorers to say, I would like to have this flavor of bestseller selections or seasonality effect, and so on and so forth. Then we have the product and content attributes. There we are directly considering to push specific segments of the products. For instance, let's push all of the products that have a 5 stars rating, or which have which are currently in discounts. Then we have the product and content contexts. So there, the idea is to use the context of the page in order to decide what should appear. So for instance, if I am on a specific product detail page and I would like to show similar product, then the context will be to align the products that I'm recommending with the context of the page, meaning what is the current product that I'm looking at. Same thing for basket cross-selling. What are the current products that are in the basket that I'm going to recommend to the user? These are the product and content contexts. And finally, we have the search term relevance, and the search term relevance leverage what the user has searched for, either in your website or in Google and other search engine to come to your website, and uses that type of context that we call the search term relevance in order to affect the results that are recommended. And so all of these best practices can be configured, so you can create your tailored widget logic with filters, rankers, and scorers from all of these different types of best practices. And then when you're done, then the system is able to generate a result list. Now this result list will be affected by semantic filters and by rules, if any are defined. Semantic filters are specific to what people are searching, so we can define in a manual but also automated way a behavior change in the results according to what the user is searching for. So if the user is searching for a category or a brand, then instead of searching for the keyword, we might prefer to either redirect him to the category or brand page, or at least to select this filter and have a clean list of results which are connected to these filters. So the semantic filters, when they are defined or when they are self-learned, they do affect the result list in the context of the search. And otherwise we have rules, and rules is really for any curated aspects of the list, because filters, rankers, and scorers, they will be able to define a strategy, but you might have a specific landing page, and on this specific landing page you want a specific product to always appear first for a different reason, and you can define a rule to overrule the filters, rankers, and scorers in a specific way for the curated aspects. And that gives you the final results. And these final results, then, they are expanded by additional information about them. One of them is the facet. So this is when I'm making a search or I go to a product listing page, and the user will see a certain amount of filtering options related to the final results. So then we have the facets, and we have the responses, where we can define different types of search messages that we would like to display to the user when he's making a certain search or when he goes to a specific section of the website. And that's basically the idea of the widget. And now let's look a little bit more in detail in the admin how that looks like. So before we saw that we could select a widget in one of the WPO. So here in the search WPO, I can click on category, and here in the category we can see the strategy of that WPO, of that widget opening. So here we can see that we have one filter, one ranker, and one scorer. So we see here the one-to-one mapping with the diagram that we have seen before. We also have a fourth section called Others. We're not going to get into it in this video too much, but we can define basically other things, other parameters the system should return, which are not actually affecting the selection of the products. So here first we have one filter, and this filter is labeled price is bigger than 0. So if we expand it, then we will see that there is a parameter field which is set to price after discount. Then in the advanced we see an operator which is selected to greater than, and then here a value for 0, which is basically how we are ending up with the price is bigger than 0. So this is how we define a filter. In this case, it's a filter which is affecting all of the products that have a certain value on a certain property. And here in the setting, I can define the name, which is the label that we will see here. We can see the use case from which the best practice has been coming from, and then quite a few other parameters which we will go over in the more advanced video about the widgets. Now, in addition to this filter, we have also a ranker. So a ranker with a quite similar logic, but on a different property. So here we have the stock, which is greater than or equal to the value 1. Same ID, but different effect, because it's not a filter, it is a ranker. And as a ranker, what it will do is that it will make sure that the products with the stock bigger or equal than 1 will appear at the top of the list, but it will not exclude the product which have a stock 0. Such is not the case of the filter. Here we have price is bigger than 0 as a filter. That means that the products with the price equal to 0 are simply excluded from the list altogether. Finally, we have a scorer, which is all-time product sales count. So here we have selected one of our automated statistics fields, BQ, that stands for BigQuery, order count, all time. And this field simply takes the number of time a product was bought and stores it in that property. So it's a very simple example case. And now what we want to do is that we would like to use it as a scorer, meaning that we would like that the products that have a very high value in this BQ order count all time get these 500 points that we define here, and the products with a very low number gets none of these points. And that's exactly what's happening here. And so the scorers are much less powerful than the rankers. So that means with the configuration as it is set here, that the products that have never been sold but have a stock bigger or equal to 1 will appear before the products that have been sold many times that are currently out of stock. And there we get exactly into the optimization discussion to say, well, is it what we want? Should we A/B test something different? And again, this is something we will go into the detail in other videos, but that's exactly what the widget configuration aspects are all about. So now let's see how we can actually find additional filters, rankers, and scorers and add them. And here I will only look currently at the simplest way to do that. This is with the best practices. So we have these WPO Optimization Strategies here. And if I click on this button, then we will see here 3 tabs. What to start with for the go live, what could be A/B tested first, and what else could you be experimented with. And this is basically for every WPO, Boxalino has prepared a list of priorities of best practices to consider. So here, if you're starting from scratch, then to go to this tab, then you will see in the search and navigation context the typical best practices. And here you have these groups that we have seen before. So the product and content statistics, or the search term relevance, or the product and content attributes. And then you have the actual names. So here we have this smart bestseller, this search attribute, this exclude ineffective products, value flags. And then if I find one that I like this smart bestseller, then I can click on it. And then I get directly the information about this best practice. It tells me what is the use case which is used behind, the typical mode it is used as. Here it's a scorer, information about the variables, what are the cases to consider. There are different properties that could be used for smart bestsellers, and how to configure it in the admin. And then if I am happy with my selection, I can click here and add it to my lists. So that's how you can add additional use cases in your scores, rankers, and filters. Of course, you can also duplicate them. You can basically move them around. So you can move this to say, I don't want this to be a filter. I would like it to become a scores. So you can do many things in the edition of these filters, but to add a new one, the easiest way is to go with the best practice with the option here. And now here we will start to look at the other part, this other concept. We have seen the widget as a concept. Now we can look at the narrative. And the narrative is the way to present the layout to the user. So in the case that we have done before, we have defined the logic that defines what products are returned. But now we will define how they should actually appear to the user. And narrative layout can be fixed or conditional. So that means that when I'm defining a narrative layout, then I can say whether it is always in a certain way or whether there are different layouts that should apply in different conditions. Maybe I want to have a different layout for different types of visitors. Maybe the visitors coming from Google Shopping should see another layout than the visitors that are coming from the newsletter. And of course, many other segmentation are possible, as well as A/B testing, of course. And in each layout, whether it is fixed or conditional, we will have three different concepts. We will have the layout blocks. The layout blocks, they are the building blocks of the layouts. You can look at them as the Lego blocks of your layout. So your integrator or internal IT team will define them. So this is not something that you will create as an administrator of the platform. You need to have them defined for you to create a narrative. But these layout blocks, they are basically your building blocks. So any layout you do, you will build it out of these layout blocks as provided. And you can nest them. So that means that when you're creating a layout, of course, you can put the elements one below the other, but you can also nest them. So you can have a sub layout blocks, inner layout blocks, and so on and so forth. So you can create very interesting layout possibilities by using this nesting. And finally, we have the parameters. So each layout block comes with its own scheme of parameter. That's very important. So that means that for every layout blocks which is prepared by your integrators, you will have a dedicated set of parameters to fill when you are entering these layout blocks in your layouts. And so as a result, you can create a layout like the one we see on the right. So with two positions. So this is what we called about before with the zones of the narrative. So we have the left position and we have the right position. On the left we have the facets, and on the right we have these 5 blocks which are one below the other. A message, then a banner, then the product grid, then the pagination, and then the SEO text. So now let's look at how this narrative looks like in the administration. So here, by going into the marketing narrative page, I can see differently defined narrative and one for our case with this category widget. So I'm going to open it. And here I can see a very similar definition of layout than the one we saw in the diagram. So with the left facets first, and then the search message, the banner, the product list, the toolbar with pagination, and the SEO text. So same layout. And as you can see, it's all in a fixed layout. You can add fixed layout, conditional layouts to make it more dynamic. And it's all based on these layout blocks. And all of these layout blocks here are the one that my team has created. So it can be your integrator or it can be your internal IT team. They have integrated all of these layout blocks. They have prepared them. So now we can use them as Lego blocks of our narrative. And here we can see that have used the facets, the message, the banner slider, the product listing, the toolbar, the SEO text layout blocks. And as we saw before, each of these layout blocks comes with their own specific parameters. So here for the SEO text, I have these rich editor for SEO text that I can see here. If I expand the search message, then I will have something completely different with these other options that I can set. So each of these layout blocks come with its own specific schema of parameters that I can edit. And see now how both fit together. So we have looked at how the widgets based on the filter, rankers, and scorers are producing these final results. We have also seen how the narrative are defining a layout. And now the key idea is that both aspects are connected together. A lot of these aspects are connected behind the scene, so you don't have to do anything as an administrator. So for instance, the facets are connected with the facets through an internal parameter called BX facets. So because your internal team has configured layout block facets with that option, then automatically it will get the facets of the widget. The same goes for the pagination and the list of products. With the BX pagination and the BX hit and BX hits parameters, behind the scene, the final results will be connected to provide the right product in the grid and to provide the right pagination. So so that's basically mean that what happens automatically is that we have a natural visualization of the content of your widget with the results in a grid, with the pagination, with the facets. And for the other aspects, these ones, we can connect them by configuring the narrative parameters. So of course, we can define many narratives, and then we can simply write the narrative, the message we want in each narrative, the banner we want in each narrative, the SEO text we want in each narrative. So we can use the narrative as a CMS, but we can also connect it with dynamic elements. So for instance, we can use the responses to define what appears in the message. We can use the active campaigns to define what appears in the banner. And we can use a connection with a headless CMS that we typically integrate directly in real time with GraphQL to define, for instance, the SEO text. Of course, all of these aspects are just examples, but they illustrate how the widget is naturally integrated in the narrative, but many other elements are added in the content of the narrative, either in a static way or in a dynamic way. And this brings us to the last screen, which basically shows us how all this fits together. So your IT team develops your front end, which is calling the narrative layout API, which will produce a certain layout based on the narrative, which is connected with the widget. And the widget logic will provide the content that should be appearing in that narrative. And that's how everything fits together. And the narrative API always calls a widget. So that's why the idea is that we call a widget, there is a selection which is done dynamically to decide which narrative should be displayed for that widget. The widget results are calculated, the narrative layout is computed, and everything is returned through the narrative layout API. So we have seen now in the admin where the widgets are, where the narratives are. We will not go into the detail in this video about the semantic filters, the rules, the responses, the facets, as well as the dynamic connections. These are things that we address in the more in-depth aspects of the presentations, of the documentations, and of other tutorial videos. But this video really tried to grasp the key concepts and put them together in your hands, that you really have a good understanding of what is a widget and what is a narrative when it comes that you have to configure these aspects in the Boxalino environment. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to see you in the next video.